Hello guys, my name is Diego Pacheco and this is gonna be another Java video, and today we'll be talking about how we can build a TCP server using Apache Mina, right? So let's get started. So basically I have an idea project here. Let me open and we're gonna start from there, right? So the first thing we're gonna check are the dependencies, right? That's literally the first thing. So in my pond.xml, as you can see, I'm using Maven here. And I have a dependency for JUnit for testing. I have the dependency of Apache Mina to one. That will be our TCP server. And Mina is cool because it takes cares about like sessions, and it has filters. So it's pretty cool way to build TCP applications. Then I'm gonna use Xstring for serialization. In my case, I'm gonna build a protocol that's gonna be XML based, but you could use any other library to serialize in any other serialization format you prefer. Then I have log4j, Apache log4j, and log4j, SL4j impel for logging, right? And that's it, pretty much it. So we don't have many dependencies here. Okay, now that we see dependencies, I'm gonna try not to piss off the demagogues, right? Because always go wrong, right? So I hope it doesn't go wrong. But I'm gonna start running the tests, right? So here I'm gonna run the server and the client, and I hope it works. I really do. Yes, it works. So the demagogues was nice with me, right? So in this test, I basically create a TCP server. Then I have this. I'm swear it's not a matches or a mattress. It's not a mattress company or anything like that. But I have this sleep well, sleep silently. It's not a pillow. It's not that my pillow guy or anything like that. But basically, I'm doing a thread sleep, and I don't want to be surrounded by trackhead all the time. It's pretty annoying, right? So I have this sleep well, not a pillow. Sleep silently, where I pass the time in milliseconds, and that's I thread sleep pretty much without having to take care of exceptions. If you take a look on the code here, it's really simple, just a static method, right? Thread sleep, and then I wrap the exception, right? Okay, so we start the server, wait for a second, then we start the client, and the client gonna connect on the server, wait a second again, and then I'm calling a specific protocol I designed called time. Every time you ask time, you get a time response back, all right? And then I'm just printing that response, checking if the response is not null, and also expecting to see an open date response, a close date response, an open date, and a close date. And that all works. As you can see here, we have some beautiful ASCII art, right, for the TCP server and the TCP client. And we can see the exchanges here. We can see returning the XML protocol I said, and it works beautifully. Okay, now that we have a good head start with confidence, we can take a look on the application, right? So basically, let's start with the model, right? So I have this exposure called date response, where I pretty much have a date, right? So it's a container type that wraps a date. And here we have like full-fledged POJO in Java. So we have empty constructor, full constructor, getters and setters, equals, hash code, and toString. The classical things, right? Now, let's look on the TCP server, right? So for the TCP server, I'm listening to the port 9000. I have some beautiful ask art here, right? Because I am this kind of guy. And then I'm saying, well, you can do like telnet and this port, and then you can try one of these XML requests, like a time, options, or quit. And then we create an acceptor. That's how Mina rolls, right? Funny fact, Mina in Portuguese means grow, right? So this is a pretty cool name for a framework. And it's rock solid. It's around, I think, 2006 or 2007, right? But anyway, there is this pattern in the Gang of Four book, right? The classical 24 design patterns in Java about one of those is like the chain of responsibilities, like filters in servlet to use this pattern. And Mina, it used the same pattern, right? So the first filter that's gonna run is a logger. In this logger, I'm passing a prefix called TCP server. So all the time you're gonna see TCP server on the logger. And then after the logger, I have a codec, right? Because there's pretty much bytes getting in, and I want to deal with text. And when I return text, I want bytes to come out, right? So I have this codec, which the text is a protocol codec filter. Then you use a text line factory, and then you need to say, okay, what's the encoding? It will be UTF-8, and then both for encode and decode, what are the end character, right? So in my case, I want to be a new line. Then finally, in the chain, we set OR handler. So this is how we're gonna do the business logic, right? So I have this time handler, and then we have some config like read buffer, idle timeout, and we bind on that specific port, right? So let me run this guy, and we are rolling, baby. Awesome, is up and running my TCP server. Now, let's take a look on the handler, and then we can actually play with telnet a bit. This will be fun. So now, my handler, right? So Mina has this interface called IO adapter where we can extend it. And what I'm doing here is, well, first I'm creating an instance of xstring because I want to do XML serialization, and I'm defining an alias, right? So I have this POJO, like I told you guys before, the date response, and I don't want, by default xstring, I'm going to return something like com.github.diego.pacheco.java.sandbox.box.mina.tcp date response, and that's a kind of a big tag, right? And we want to make this tag smaller, and by that I can say an alias, right? So when you see this class, actually just short for date minus response, right? It will be much cleaner. Then I am overriding the exception caught. So every time there's an exception, we're gonna print the stack trace. And I also overriding the idle, the session idle. So we're gonna print some header I have here, the word idle, and then the idle count, right? And I have this utility method called get context info, where I get the Mina session, and then what I'm doing is like thread.currentThread.getName, so we can know the thread that's operating under it. And then inside the square brackets, I'm showing the session ID. And that's one of the cool things about Mina, right? It has session management for us. Then the real deal, the real interesting things is on the message receive message, right? So every time Mina got a message, you're gonna trigger this callback, and then we're gonna receive the session and the object itself, right? So because I'm using a text-based codec here, what it means is like I'm gonna have a string, right? So I basically just need to do a toString on the message, all right? And then I'm gonna do a bunch of verifications, like, okay, so are you sending me a quit protocol, like this XML tag quit? Well, if you're doing that, well, I'm gonna say bye because I am polite, right? And then I'm gonna do session close on flush, means I'm gonna end the TCP connection, and I'm gonna return, so we get out of here. If you are not sending quit, all right, by any means you're sending /time, you want to know the time, right? In that case, I'm gonna instantiate a date response. I'm gonna set date as current date. Then I'm gonna use xstring to serialize that object in XML, and I'm gonna write that XML back to you, and I'm also gonna log that, right? So this is gonna be logging twice because I'm logging here, and also we have a login on the a logger on the chain, right? And then we return. But if we didn't get quit on time, maybe we get on options, and if we get options, I'm gonna return this XML to you options, and your options are time and quit, right? And I'm gonna write that back to you and log. Otherwise, I really don't know what you're talking about because you're not passing quit, time, or options. Then I really don't know what's that. I'm gonna say, okay, that's invalid option, whatever you pass to me, and that's an error, right? And that's it. That's the whole implementation. So now that we have, before I jump to explain the tests, right? And because I have a client for the tests, we have the TCP server up and running here. So one thing we can do, we can use telnet to connect on that server, right? And that's like something pretty sweet we can do here. So we just do telnet 1, the IP 127.0.0.1 because it's local, 1, and then the port, right? And there we go, we are connected. And then I can try to do stuff, right? So let's say, okay, so what are my options, right? What can I do? And then we say, oh, you can do time and you can do quit. Oh, awesome. So let me do time, all right? And if I do time, I get a time. And I can do that the whole day, as many as I want, right? And then we get a new response. So what happens if I pass something like this one, bullshit, right? This doesn't exist. Then I'm gonna say, okay, this is an invalid option. I don't know what you're talking about, right? And finally, if I do quit, I can end the whole thing, right? So you see connection is closed. And if you look like my program, is also, it says it's closed here, right? So we see the TCP server is up and running. Now, let's take a look how I test this and how I made the client, right? Well, it's okay. So we saw the sleep well. It's just an abstraction to, do thread sleep without worrying about the exception. But now we need to see there's a TCP client, and the TCP client is this. So we have a handler that I'm gonna cover in a moment. That's I named this as a client session handler. Then the TCP client has a constructor, and on the constructor, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create a new thread and I'm gonna init. So most of the times you really don't wanna do this, what I'm doing, like you don't wanna create a new thread because, there's better ways to deal with threads in Java. You can have like a thread local, or you can have a thread pool, or you can use semaphores, you can use like executors, but really dealing with threads directly in this way, new threads, is really dangerous. You could have resource leaks, you could have like race conditions, you could have all sorts of issues, right? So but in this case, I really just need one thread the whole program, right? So that's completely fine, right? So then as you can see here, we have a lambda. So this lambda, sort of a functional interface, going to be translated to a runnable. And then we're going to call the init method. And if we look on the init method, we have a beautiful ASCII, right, for the TCP client. And then we have a connector, right? So there's a new socket connector. I set a timeout. And then I'm gonna add some filters, right? So there is a logger and codec filter as expected. I'm also setting my handler, which is the client handler. We're gonna cover this class soon, so no worries. And then I have this for loop, right? Because I don't want this to end. Then we connect on the IP of the server in the port, right? And we get a connect future. And then I'm setting that I want to reuse the address. That's the case. I'm connect and disconnect all the time. I don't want to get that annoying, binding exceptions that we might get. Then I'm gonna do wait for interoperability. Means, well, as long as no one finish you, it should be rolling. And we're gonna have an instance of the session. So this is like the client session, the writing part of the session, right? And this will make sense soon. So my handler is gonna be capable both to handle requests and response. So I'm passing the client session to this handler, as you can see here. So I'm saying set server writing session, and I'm passing the session, right? And then I break. Then I do a wait for interoperability, all right? So if you don't interrupt, keep rolling. If you get an interruption, then dispose the connector, close the port, and we're done, all right? Now, let's look the client session handler, right? So that's the missing piece, and this is a bit more complicated. So remember in Mina handlers, you can extend IO handler. And what I have here, I have a IO session, right, which is the server writing session. And I have this buffer of session buffers, right? But let's ignore this for now. Then here, I have a setter, so I can receive the writing session here, and I can hold that in my property here, right? And then I have the two core methods here, which are ask time and message receive. So every time this client receives a message from the server, from Mina, this callback gonna be called, right? And what I want to do is, okay, I want to get the session ID. So session ID is a long. I want to connect with string, concatenate with string, so I have a string value. So the session ID is going to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now on. And then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to print that. I'm going to say, okay, so I got this message and I'm operating on this session ID. And then I'm going to do something to figure out the buffer. And either I want to clean the buffer or I want to append in the buffer, right? And if I append on the buffer, later on I can get the result, right? So if we have this method called ask time, all right? And when we look the client, again, it would make more sense, right? I know that sure, but we might need to go there again. But the ask time is a public method, right? That you can call it, and we are calling it. If you look on the TCP client, we have a wrapper around that, right? So we have our own ask time that delegates to the handler ask time. And if we look on my test, which is this one, so we are calling client ask time, right? So this is gonna go here and then gonna go to the handler ask time. And what will happen is I'm gonna get the session of the writing session of the client, right? And I'm gonna write this because I wanna know the time, all right? And then, okay, this is like two parallel threads going on, right? It's async. So I need to do some busy waiting because it is not sync at all right? It's not blocking. When I write time, eventually I'm gonna get the response here, but I don't know yet, right? And the way that I control this, I use a concurrent hash map, right? So a concurrent hash map in Java is a collection that does not break, right? So I have this map where the key is the session and the optional is the buffer, right? That I'm gonna use to buffer the message, the response from Mina server. And then I do this, right? So okay, so if my map of buffers dot I want to get the buffer associated to the session ID. So if this specifically string buffer is null, or if it's empty, because I'm using optional here, right? Well, it means I need to wait because it means I don't get the answer from the server yet. So I'm gonna wait 100 milliseconds and I'm gonna do a busy waiting here. This code has a problem, which is, well, this code is thread safe because of this concurrent hash map, right? And because Mina has this concept of sessions. But the problem is, okay, what happens if I never get a buffer inside of this specific session? This will never end, right? It would forever. So, to make this code better, we might have a counter or get a timestamp. So after some time, we can time this out, right? So easily I could code this, but I didn't, right? But the limitation here right now, right? So you can do yourself if you want. Then when we get out of this while, it means, well, this code run and we have a response now. Well, in that case, I'm just gonna go to my map of buffers and I'm gonna get the buffer associated to the session ID. I'm gonna do another get because remember, this is an optional, right? So here is optional.get. And then I'm gonna do a toString. So I'm gonna get that string buffer and transform it in a string. Once I have that on a string, I wanna clean up the buffer, right? So for that session ID, I'm gonna set empty and I'm gonna return to you, right? So this guy here is doing the blocking for you, the busy waiting. It's not really blocking, but it's doing some sort of a busy waiting. So even if this whole thing is async, you can get your answer back, right? So that's how it works. Now, the message receive. So first thing is I get the session, right? And this session is a reading session, right? It's the session that is a callback session that Mina gonna execute here once we have a message coming back from the server, right? And then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna get that ID. I'm gonna concatenate with string, so I have a session ID in string. Then I'm gonna print it, and then I'm gonna do this. Well, if the buffer is null or empty, it means this is the first message or is a new message, right? It doesn't matter if it's the first or a new one, but it means I don't have a buffer. So the first thing I need to do is to create a buffer. So for that session ID, I'm gonna do optional of, and then I'm gonna set a new string buffer. So I have a buffer. Now that I have a buffer, I can add the message to the buffer, right? Because I have the message here. So I can do session buffers, get session ID.get append, and then I transform the message to a string. And once I do that, this loop here gonna break out and gonna run here, all right, and the whole thing gonna work. So that's it. I hope you guys like it. Mina is really cool to build TCP applications in a sane way, all right? So that's it for today. I hope you guys like it. See you next time. Take care. Cheers.